He was the third god I'd met, but the first who really struck me as godlike. He lounged on his throne of fused human bones, looking lithe, graceful, and dangerous as a panther. The Lightning Thief, Chapter 19. Hey everyone, it's the year's 1999 coming back at you in another video. Today we're going to be talking about a party meeting gods in Dungeons & Dragons, or I suppose the advice I give here could be applicable to a lot of tabletop RPGs. Now, this can happen in a number of ways, be it that maybe they just travel to wherever this god is currently, or maybe they cast a spell to speak to the god, or they just go on such a bad rampage that the divine has to intervene. For this video, I'm going to be talking about my own experience with the subject, some miscellaneous ideas of how it could happen in other ways, and we're also going to talk a bit about the divine blessings from the Dungeon Master's Guide. With all that in mind, let's get started with my own experience from the Enter the Dungeon campaign podcast. So the characters here have so far met 3 gods, maybe 3.5, potentially even more depending on how you want to count, but we'll get to the specifics in a minute. For context, the overall mission of the campaign is hunting down the Planar Gems. They're a lot like the Infinity Stones, but instead of being based on a fundamental aspect of nature, each one's based on a different plane of existence. And what was probably my favorite arc of the game so far, the players had to go to a druid conclave to ask for the Fey Gem. After a preliminary test ruled them to have the potential to be righteous, the druids sent them on a quest on the Fey plane. Side note, for extra fun, I had them all be body swapped. I really should do an in-depth analysis of why I think this arc went over so well. Anyway, on the other plane, they met with a nature god named Iochan, who likes to take the form of a centaur. He's the guardian of the souls of children who died in the woods. He asked the party to investigate why a castle magically appeared in his forest, and why most Fey spirits are unable to enter it. It turned out to have been an ancient halfling structure that somehow made it over there. They weren't able to figure out how, but that it was seized by 2/3 of a hag coven. The third member was a night hag who they were trying to summon by the 9 hells. After barely being able to stop this by the very skin of their teeth, Iochan meets back up with them and tells them how he was actually born as a human. He was a courier, and one day he was traveling a great distance when his horse died in the middle of delivering medicine. In faith, he called out to Planar, the chief nature god, and he was magically changed into the first centaur. After his delivery, Planar offered to change him back to a regular human, but he decided to stay as a centaur in order to better be able to make his deliveries and help more people. At the end of his life, he was raised up to the level of the gods in recognition of his great charity. After his story, he then vouched for the druids so that the players now know where the Fey Gem is. Yes, that's right. This was a quest to get another quest. Haha, laughs in Dungeon Master. Anyway, the second god they met was technically a goddess, the Raving Queen. In my campaign world, she is the current deity of the concept of death, and rules over the Thanatos plane. They actually got to the Thanatos plane by chasing a vampire who was using the Thanatos gem. And then, while they were parleying with the queen, the monk actually decided to become her warlock. So now he's multiclassing as a warlock. Now, something else they learned about a bit about the nature of how that plane worked is that there have been many death gods over the ages, and when one dies, it becomes part of the structure of the plane. For example, each of the rivers of the underworld was a god at some point who retired. This is where the 3.5 thing comes in. While traveling in the haunted forest after the monk got possession of the Thanatos gem away from the vampire, he heard the calling of the woods itself. He agreed that this force, whatever it is, would be allowed to use the gem as a connection point so that way they could communicate later. So this is kind of like a half, I'm saying it because they sort of met a god whose powers have mostly faded, but now maybe they've given him some extra power, a connection to the other worlds. More laughing and evil, Dungeon Master. Yep, I kind of hope my players watch this video. Anyway, the most recent god they met was while leaving the plane, and because they went out on the River Styx, guided by the god Porthum. He's kind of like a reworking of Charon from Greek myth, except he doesn't just specialize in the dead. He has a boat that goes up and down the river, and if you can get to the river, he'll take you to any other point along it for 1 gold coin. If you can't actually get to the river, though, there is an elaborate magical process that they heard about but don't quite know yet that involves a high-level spell, running water, and a piece of death, such as a corpse. I really look forward to see how they will use this travel service in the future. The players are currently level 6, and with the interplanar nature of this quest, they are bound to be meeting more gods. And my intention for there being such presence of divinity is threefold. One, it's to remind the players that there are powerful beings keeping an eye on them, for good or for ill. The second is that alliances can be made with these beings, with or against them, in forming various teams and all that. And the third is to let them strive for divine apotheosis if they want to. After all, 2 of the gods I mentioned above, at one point were mortals who found a way to become more powerful. Now, with all that stated, let's talk about some other ways that they might be able to meet gods. First up is that sometimes faith is found when you hit your lowest point. Let's say that the party fails a quest, and they fail hard. Most of the characters have died, and whoever's left had barely survived. In desperation, they begin to question whether or not their mission is even worth going on. In response, their god reaches out. Perhaps in a vision, perhaps in a short message, perhaps even just through a sign. The character remembers that they are not alone. They remember that they are strong, and that they can do this. I want to emphasize that this doesn't need to be a cleric or a paladin. Any character can have a strong connection to the divine. Our next way is sort of the opposite, with a formal reprimand. A character with some highly otherworldly influence, namely a warlock, cleric, or especially a paladin, does something highly contrary to the god's ends. Their god intervenes and perhaps even puts a hold on their powers. They are told that they need to correct their ways, or their god will no longer stand beside them. In the event of a player going murder hobo, this could be the wake-up call they need. But in the event of an evil character trying to become good, perhaps this could be their chance to distance themselves from an evil god. Now, the last one I'm thinking about is that a god reaches out to a high-level party to give them some sort of quest. Perhaps a grave domain god hires them to slay a lich, or maybe a war god calls on them to sow dissent in his enemy's ranks. Now, what did the party get from this? What kind of rewards might a god or goddess give in exchange? How about some of those divine blessings? Now, 7 example blessings are found on page 228 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. These are gifts from a powerful divine figure that give a permanent boost to a given character. And rather than go through all of them, I'm just going to say the 3 most interesting, which here is the Blessing of Health, which ratifies your constitution, Blessing of Magic Resistance, which grants advantage on saves against magic, and the Blessing of Valhalla, which grants you the powers of the Horn of Valhalla, which is an awesome item that you should definitely check out. Yeah, I could tell you here, but it's more fun if I make you look for it. Feel free to make up whatever blessings you want, though. I think it would be best if you, of course, tailor the blessing to fit the situation. For example, if they did a quest for an agricultural god, then perhaps they get the ability to summon produce. Yes, that was an example I just gave, summoning produce. What do you think of that? Well, aside from me randomly saying that they should have the ability to summon produce, which may or may not be a good idea given the party, I hope that you all enjoyed the video. I think that we should keep this conversation going in the comments, so be sure to tell me your opinions on this. If you want to see my Enter the Dungeon campaign in action, check it out at the link below. Hope that you're all tuned tomorrow. We're going to be talking about why every character should have some kind of religious outlook. Until then, have a great day, and God bless.